Long before I was ever taught who made me and why God made me, my mother taught me my first prayers. How well I remember those Saturday evenings when she would gather all of us around the picture of Our Lady of Perpetual Help in the foyer of our home to say the Rosary for my father, who was a captain in the Navy and who was deployed at sea. I'm sure you remember in the days before Vatican II, which was when I was a child, women like my mother would pray the Rosary during Mass, because in those days the Mass was in Latin. So in the 1950s and early 60s, praying the Rosary was one of the things one did to pass time until the Eucharist was distributed. I really loved my mother's Rosary. It was about 2 feet long and made of clear rhinestones that seemed so large in my young eyes that they looked like glass doorknobs. It must have weighed at least 1.5 pounds. My mom taught me to treat the Rosary as a sacred object, and I learned to carry it in my left-hand pocket with my lunch money on my way to public school every day. And I learned to distinguish the sound of her Rosary from the large rosaries that clattered and clanged at the side of Sister Marie-Therese, who taught me my first catechism lessons. My mother's Rosary had a softer sound. In the morning, I could hear her mumbling the prayers as she sat in bed, the glass beads passing through her fingers, quietly brushing against one another in a rhythmic fashion. I also remember she was always praying for the conversion of Russia. Do you remember doing that? Without a doubt, I think this was the #1 intention on the prayer charts of the 1950s and 60s. To quote one spiritual writer, praying the Rosary was like firing a spiritual atom bomb at the Soviet Union, which Catholics needed to do for world peace. Unfortunately, there was a period during my life when my fidelity to saying a daily Rosary had almost stopped. Maybe it was because I quietly rejected it as a childish form of prayer, coming to reason that it was no longer necessary for me to accumulate prayers in my celestial bank account. Or perhaps I was looking for something more sophisticated in my life, like spiritual reading or meditation. But oddly enough, at some point, I started praying it again. As a Dominican priest, Father Herbert McCabe, has written, prayer is a lot like love. You won't really begin to understand it until you actually do it. So as the Nike commercial urges us, I just did it. I wouldn't say that my prayer was fruitless, but for a long time it seemed that I was just repeating endless Hail Marys over and over again. But amazingly, it has borne fruit. I feel something now that's difficult to describe. Sometimes it's like a lullaby that just soothes me like a child in his mother's arms. Other times, it quietly assures me, like my father did when I was a little boy about to undergo eye surgery, and he bent over and whispered in my ear and said, "Don't be afraid, Philip. All will be well." All I can say is, if you are consistent in praying this simple prayer, you know what I'm talking about. A spiritual writer offers this insight, which I think helps to appreciate the power of the Rosary. He writes, if God is everywhere at all times, then we are not really summoning God when we pray. The thing that actually stands between God and ourselves is ourselves. We get in our own way. because we can't easily remove ourselves from thoughts about ourselves and all the trash that constantly runs through our minds. This means that anything that helps remove the trash and the self-preoccupation as a barrier to God is prayer. And praying the Rosary helps to do this. The rote prayers of the Rosary help us to focus on God instead of ourselves. You know, I've discovered after years of praying the Rosary, I can now sometimes lose myself in it. The feeling is no more and no less than that of God suddenly sneaking up on me.